All right, I did a short a few days ago about emptying your water heater, but I wanted to do something a little bit more in depth. Not necessarily as a step-by-step tutorial, because your water heater may be configured differently than mine, and it's hard for me to predict that, but just to talk about some general principles of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what to consider when you do it on your own system. Okay, so quick explanation. So basically a hot water heater typically has a gas line coming in made out of black pipe, and you'll have an on-off valve for that. Then you have the valving that comes on the water heater itself that allows you to change the temperature and turn it on and off. So the first thing you want to do when you're working on your water heater is you want to kill the gas. Now you can do that by turning this all the way to low, so it's just the pilot light. You can turn it completely off, that you have to reignite the pilot light afterwards. You can also double that up by turning this gas off, and sometimes you can even go all the way to your gas meter and turn it off there if you're nervous or you just want that triple protection. The next thing that you're going to have is you're going to have two water lines. Basically, you're going to have a cold water line coming in and a hot water line going out. And you could test that by touching them if you wanted to know. But one of them should have a valve, and you can turn that valve on and off to control the flow through the tank. Now, one thing you wouldn't want is you wouldn't want your water tank to be empty and the gas to be on and burning, because without the water in there, you can damage your tank. So that's something to consider. Now, the last thing you may find on here is something that looks like this. This is basically if the pressure in the tank were to ever be too high and become dangerous, this valve would open and just dump water onto your garage floor down there. It's an overflow valve. Now, they suggest testing this every once in a while, and that's because things that were designed to move fail if they sit for a long period of time. So, and then when they do open, instead of resetting properly, they get jammed open. So there's kind of a general principle. You can go around your house once a year and you can open and close the valve behind the toilet and underneath the sink, just so that they don't get seized up and stop working altogether. Of course, if you've not done that in a long time, by doing so, you might immediately see a problem where you open the valve and then you can't close it again. But sometimes it's better to discover that in a testing scenario when you're expecting there to possibly be a problem versus in an emergency where water's flooding all over your house. Anyhow, now at the bottom of the tank, you'll have probably not this because I added this, but you'll have some sort of plug or valve that allows you to drain the tank. Now, this thread is typically the same as a garden hose thread. So this is just a garden hose adapter like you'd have outside to water your garden. And I added that so that every year, instead of removing this plug and water flowing all over my garage, I can just hook up a garden hose to this. I can open this valve and drain it. So that's something, if you don't have already, you'll need to do the first time. And the first time you do it, you're going to have quite a lot of water coming out. So you have to think about how to do that. What some guys will do is they'll remove the plug that's here and install a garden hose, but you are going to get some water in the general area. Okay, so let's imagine that you've already done this and you already have this valve and you've already drained your tank once, and now it's the next year. I'll just walk you through the principles that matter, and then I'll also tell you in detail about how I do it. So the first thing I do is I shut off the gas to the water heater. That way, there's no chance of the tank being empty and the gas coming on and basically the whole tank heating up without any water in it. Then I'll attach a garden hose here. I like to use a 90-degree brass elbow that you can get online. Just Google garden hose 90-degree brass elbow. It helps with the accessibility. And then you open this up. Now, when you open that up, the water is going to drain down the driveway, something like that, through the garden hose. But eventually a vacuum will form inside this tank, because as water leaves, something has to come in to replace it, and that something is air. And if you haven't closed this off, that's fine. Basically, as the water runs out down there, fresh cold water will run in and the tank will remain full. But I would recommend closing this, and I'll go over that in just a minute. If you do close this, then it's a closed system, and as the water begins to drain, the air will form a vacuum and eventually it'll stop draining. That's where this plug comes in. At the top of the water heater, you're going to have a plug that looks like this. This is 1/16 inch. It's fairly tight, so you're going to want a ratchet with a little bit of leverage. And when you remove this, you're going to start letting air come in the tank, which will allow the water to drain at the bottom. Now you want to loosen this while the tank is still full, because a full tank is a heavy tank, and that means when you go to torque on this, this whole thing is not going to move around and break these fittings. So you want to loosen this when the tank is still completely full, but you don't want to loosen this if the water's on, because what will happen is the water, if the tank is already full, the water will start running straight down there and up here, and it'll go all over. And that has happened to me once. I hadn't thought it through. So before you open this, you want the water to be off, but you want the tank to be full. And as I mentioned, you want the gas to already be off. When you remove this cap, and you can see this in my shorts video if you want, when you remove this plug, there should be a long rod attached to it, about 3 feet long. There's a piece of steel at the core, and then there's surrounding that piece of steel a mixture of aluminum, zinc, and magnesium. And those metals attract the corrosive elements, the corrosive minerals and things like that inside the water, so that that rod disintegrates instead of your tank disintegrating. And the rate at which this rod disintegrates is going to vary depending on the temperature that you run the tank at and the cleanliness of the water that's coming into it. But it's been my experience, and from what I've read, something like every 5 years it's going to need replacing. They cost about 30 bucks. You can get them on the internet. You can get them locally. Just call around. But you're going to want to have one on hand before you do this. And that way you can replace it if you need to. Or you can do the job twice and go get one from the store. On the years that I don't replace this, I do take a wire brush and I clean off all of the oxidation on the rod to expose the fresh aluminum, magnesium, zinc mix. Okay, so let's say that we've turned off this valve. We've turned off, so there's no more water coming into the tank. There's no more natural gas flowing. We have this outlet valve that we've added open, so water's running down the garden hose into the street, and now we open this. And now you have fresh air coming in, and this whole tank is basically going to drain. So I let the whole tank drain. If you go put your hand at the end of the garden hose, you'll feel little bits. Shut the door, please. You'll get little bits of like calcium deposits. It kind of looks like white chalky stuff. And that's one of the things that you're trying to flush out of the tank. So once the tank stops running, once the tank stops draining and there's no water coming out of the garden hose anymore, I like to come back and turn this on. And what that does is that sends cold water down this tube right into the bottom of the tank, and it kind of emulsifies and mixes up and creates some turbulence down there. And what you'll find is all of a sudden more of that white chalky stuff starts coming out the end of the garden hose. Now, if you leave this on long enough that the tank fills up, eventually it's going to come squirting out of this hole. But generally, if you have the outlet valve open, it'll never fill up enough because it's draining faster than it's filling. And what I like to do is I like to leave that cold water running and the garden hose draining for 20-30 minutes. And you can, again, let the garden hose run into your hand. And if you can still feel grit in your hand, that means it's still flushing out the calcium and the deposits. At some point, you're going to be satisfied with that. So you can go ahead and turn off the outlet valve so the tank begins to fill with water. And then as the tank fills more and more and more, you can go ahead and close off this plug. Now you want to close off this plug when the tank has a lot of water in it and is therefore very heavy. Otherwise, as you torque this down, you might move your whole machine or the whole water heater, but you'll be able to perceive that. Once the tank is full, you'll have air trapped in here. And so you need to flush that out by turning on the hot water in a few of your faucets in the house, maybe one close to the water heater, like in our case, the kitchen, or one far away, like the bathtub, and you'll get a bunch of air out of there. And eventually the air will stop hissing and coughing and sneezing from the faucets, and you'll know that this tank and all the lines are filled again with cold water. Then you can go through the manufacturer's procedures for either turning the water heater back on or relighting the pilot light, whatever it is that you've done in your case. And then basically you're back in action. So I like to do this once a year. Certainly it wouldn't hurt to do it more often than once a year, but once a year has been the pattern. This particular tank is from 1998, so it's 26 years old right now. so it's lasted a good long time. I can't take complete credit for that because I've only owned the house since 2015, and the first 2 years I didn't do this. So it is a good practice. And when I first did this and I removed this cap, the whole thing was only that long. It was just a cap. There was no rod, there was no aluminum, there was no magnesium because it was completely gone and it had fallen to the bottom of the tank and busted off. So that's something you really want to avoid. You want to keep this anode rod fresh because you want the rod getting corroded, not your tank. All right, this was obviously a longer format video. There's only so much you can do in a short, but the shorts also sort of help me reach a larger audience and get people interested in the content. So I'll try and do kind of one of each. I hope that was helpful to someone. If not, give it a thumbs down. Let me know that no one's interested in this kind of content. In the meantime, be safe and do as much as you can around your own house to save money and improve the longevity of your appliances. Take care, folks.